Now, we talked about these zonings being pushed down to the municipalities through the enabling acts. Currently, these municipalities can also push them down to developers when they start developing their subdivisions. And if you think back to the chapter where we dealt with the northwest quadrant and the northwest, remember the third method was lot and block, and we talked about where the lots are numbered in a section of the division. That lot and block was developed and will be developed through this method. They will have what's called a subdivision plan. That subdivision plan is usually created originally by the subdivider. And if you think back to chapter 1, those three people that we talked about, a subdivider, a developer, and a builder, I had you add those three people. Here's where we're going to start dealing with them. That subdivider is going to go out and buy 100 acres from a farmer, and then what he's going to do is divide it into parcels so that he can then sell them off. He will have a plan on, well, okay, where does the road come in? Where are we going to put a sound swale? Where are we going to put the park? Is there wetlands that we can't build on because the three-toed flying sloth has to have a place to live? That's hilarious to me because no one's ever heard of a three-toed flying sloth. The developer is the one that constructs the improvements. The roads, the streets. Yeah, it would fly. What was that movie where they were animals and cops? Utopia. Did you guys see that? Zootopia. The best part in the whole thing is when they go in to get his license and the BMV workers are sloths. That is so hilarious undertone that it's amazing. And he goes like, you want to hear a joke? And they're like, no, we ain't got the time. That sloth's like, ha, ha. He's like, oh, you're killing me. So they're going to create what's called a land development plan. A land development plan or a subdivision plan is the plot plan of the map of where all of these lots go. Now, one of the things that they must take into consideration is this thing called density zoning. And we just touched on this. Density zoning, basically the easy way to understand this, it's the number of units or houses per acre. Okay? So if someone like Franklin Township has a density zoning of 2.6, that means they can only allow 2.6 houses per acre. That keeps the population low. But unfortunately, that also keeps the tax base low. So to provide all of the same services like the street repair and all that, taxes have to be higher. So you're actually paying for the fact that your neighbors are not right on top of you. If they had a density zoning of like 20, oh yeah, you'd have a lot of taxes, but you'd have 20 houses on an acre of property.
Any apartment complexes in Franklin Township? I'm thinking of up and down Franklin Road. I can't think of apartment complexes now.
Yeah, I don't know if there is an apartment complex, I think where Shelbyville cuts at an angle by Arlington. Isn't there one, or is that a housing addition? There's one right there just east of Emerson, which is the cutoff. Very few. Very few apartment complexes because of their zoning. So if someone said our zoning's 2.6 and we have 10 acres, that means they can only build 26 houses. And that 10 permits, or these 26 permits that would get issued by the municipality, is to control the population. Because watch this. Let's say Davis Homes comes in and goes, I want to build 100 homes. And they say, okay, we'll give you the permits. ooh, wait a minute. Now we have more people in this, and it throws our balance of teacher to student ratio. We need a new school. Or we don't have enough I don't want to say firepower because that's not right. Fire protection power. We got to build a new fire department, hence the new fire on Combs and Stop 11. All right? So that population is what, or is that Combs and Southport?
I guess Combs and Southport.
Combs and, yeah, it's been there for a while now. It's an old joke I've been using. So now it's an old fire department. It's one of their newer ones. Still $1.5 million. All right? Point being is they couldn't allow that many permits to be built because it starts throwing off numbers that are regulated by someone else, like the student to teacher ratio. Or the worst one would be your waste station. Like too many houses, our waste water treatment plant can't handle that. So that's how they do that and why they do that, and they do that through this thing called density zoning. The plat map would show where those 26 homes go. They would roll that up into the state, and that's how they end up with these housing additions or the lot and block method, which was, if you recall, the third method of addressing. Now, so far what we've talked about is the man. It's the man holding you down. We actually can do it to ourselves. There are private land use controls, and they come in two different forms. Most commonly, one of them is called deed restrictions, or CCRs, covenant conditions and restrictions. I remember one class I said CCR, and I don't mean the band. And a kid in the front row went, "Who's CCR?" I'm like, "You, out." All right? Yeah. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions are put on by the builder to make sure that when someone is building a new house, it meets certain requirements. Now, why would they care that a new home meets certain requirements? Exactly, to maintain the property values throughout that housing addition. So if you go to Kensington Grove, which is right beside Center Grove High School, when you buy a lot in there, it tells you house has to be 5,000 square feet, has to have brick, has to have the garage facing the back, has to be on lease this big of acre, has to have a basement. And they do that so that every other home that's in there, when they go to sell, they have comparable comps to support the value. Because what you don't want is to be living in Kensington Grove in one of the big homes, and your neighbor pulls his mobile home in on the lot beside you with the spinner still going and says, "I'm home. I was finally there to sit on my throne as the Prince of Bel-Air." So builders can do it to us with CCRs to make sure, hey, you got to build this house. Here's the size of the house you got to build. Here's the style. And that is to do that. We can actually take one step further, and then that community creates a group of people that dictate, well, we don't want your boat sitting in the driveway. Can't have sheds in the backyard. It's called a homeowners association. Tad, Biff, Muffy. Let's go to the yacht. For instance, our homeowners association was not allowed chain link fence. You can have a picket fence or you can have the 6-foot fence, but you can't have a chain link fence. You know, they thought that looked tacky. Couldn't have above ground pools. You can't have an outbuilding unless that outbuilding was up against the house. They didn't want it out in the yard. So they wanted the yards to look clean. Bunch of snobby people. If you violate that, by the way, they can actually send you if you're going to build and you violate that, they can send you a cease and desist. I told you about our president of ours, didn't I? Did I tell you that? I forget which stories I tell anymore. In the housing addition I lived in, I no longer live there. I've since remarried and moved to Nashville. We had a rule that said no above ground pools, which I understand that being a level 1 assessor, I know there's not even a column on the assessment card for positive value. It's always a negative value. This guy started to build an above ground pool. And the president of our homeowners association was a sheriff in the second house. When you pulled in and went around the first curve, he lived right there. He was the president of the homeowners association back when we managed it ourselves. So rather than walk back and talk to the guy and knock on the door and go, yo, dude, you can't do that. You probably need to take that down. Steve went straight to the court, filed a court action, got a cease and desist order, and subpoenaed the guy and sent it to him and said, you got to stop. Which resulted in the same answer. I meant the guy took the pool down. But about 2 days later, in the police officer's front yard, someone had taken weed killer and in big letters wrote the word dick in his front yard. Now, they're not sure who it was. They have some pretty good examples or ideas. But in about 6 or 7 foot letters, weed killer was sprayed in his yard. So he had this big, nice green yard with brown grass that spelled out that word. Yeah. Yeah, it was Sherman Commons. That's exactly where it was. You live there? Where'd you live at? Oh. We lived on Dahlgren Lane, which is the cross one, and then I lived way in the back in Montgomery, back in the cul-de-sac. That was my first house after the divorce. Yeah, somebody said, I wonder if he's going to send himself a letter. No, but coincidentally, within a month or so or 2 months, we hired a company to become our HOA because they said, yeah, we're not going to do that. So they can file. Now, there are some things, homeowners associations, if you're violating it and they fail to catch it, there's a term called latches. If they don't do it in a certain amount of time, they lose their right to sue. All right? For example, we were one of the very first homes built in there. We had a deck. Our deck on the back of the house magically appeared over the weekend. You know, Friday it wasn't there. Monday it was there. Don't know how it happened. Assumed it was the deck fairy. All right? No permit, no permission, nothing. No, yeah, we had a permit. They can't now come to us and go, hey, you didn't have a permit for that because now it's been 20 years, all right? So there is a term called latches, which says if they fail to exercise the right in a certain amount of time, they lose that, all right? So those are private ways that we can do it to ourselves. I want to talk about one last topic on the next audio file.